this is such a dream job for me. It's so fun. I get to meet with passionate, excited people who care about their community. And get to help them as they engage their community, come up with this collective vision, and then make that vision a reality. I think that is really cool, in my opinion. And I, to be able to do that, deeply rely on both the communities I work with and people who have been doing this for a long time. My background is in community-driven development, architecture, and engagement, and all of that. But I think one of the things that I have learned is that the best thing I can do is come to communities, listen to them, and adapt to really meet the needs and help people realize that they are experts in this, whether they know it or not. And so I'm gonna pause for a second and I'm gonna let this wonderful group of people introduce themselves. But really quickly, are we doing okay in virtual world? We're all set up? Okay, hello, everyone. I'm gonna sit down. Don't worry, the owl is focused on us. We're not getting like the nose shots. So good there. But yeah, if we could take a moment, you guys just wanna go down the row and sort of say your name and all that wonderful stuff.
Sure.
Thanks for
Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Megan Grove. I'm an attorney with SRH Law. We're located in Burlington. My practice focuses on nonprofits. So we do everything from formation, bylaws and governance, helping folks transition their programs, you know, and any issue your nonprofit has, we can help you with it. Well, most of them. So what we've been doing a lot of is working with community trust organizations, helping them do the startup and get their organizations off the ground and get that application for tax exempt status submitted so they can do the good work to serve their communities.
I'm Thayer Tomlinson, and I am from Guilford, Vermont, which is in our southeastern corner. And I am the president of the board of the Friends of Algiers, which is a community trust that was started almost 20 years ago and has gone through many iterations. What I always call myself is the second generation board member there. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tina Breault. I'm from Lunenburg, and we just formed our trust last year, December of last year, actually. It's the Lunenburg Gilman Community Trust, and we were one of the first groups selected for the Village Trust Initiative.
I'm Stephanie Barrett, and like Tina, I am from a trust that was recently formed December 1st, the Snowsville Community Trust, which is in the town of Braintree, which is just 5 miles from here. So if you are heading north on 89, don't get on at exit 4, come down to Route 12 and go north 5 miles. And then you'll pass through the little village of Snowsville, which is the where we're focused. And then you can head on north and pick it up at Route 5 at exit 5 in Northfield. But yes, we also received one of the additional VTI grants. And so that was the impetus for us forming so quickly.
Thank you all so much. Yeah, so there, like I said, I have a background that kind of supports this work. But I have learned so much over the past year working alongside, I'd like to say supporting these groups, but really working alongside them to help them achieve what they're trying to do. And so there's a lot that I wish I knew up front, but we all learn as we go. So that's why we're here today. We're going to go through a few questions, and I'm actually going to kick it off this first question going backwards. So Stephanie and Tina, I'm going to have you go first and we'll work toward Megan. But the first question that I want to ask is, why did you form a community trust? And if you want to comment, what are the reasons to do this versus just relying on the town or another existing organization in your community?
So the reason that Community Trust in Snowsville was formed when it was last fall is because of the VTI program and the successful grant application. But I will tell you that the two neighbors who sought that grant reached out to me. I reached out to a neighbor who said, oh, wouldn't it be great, you know, 3 years ago at a garden party, if we got together and did something about the village of Snowsville. And so that's basically the reason why we worked through October, November, having several meetings, weekly, you know, to get our bylaws in and submitted to the Secretary of State. You know, several people showed up at those meetings, some declined to serve on the trust as a director or member of the trust. But we created a ship that has 15 members. There are 11 of us serving right now, so we have room to add more if there's more interest shown. And the village of Snowsville, for those that have not driven through it, has several older buildings that are, some are substantial in size that could use redevelopment. Let's say they're underutilized. And they, you know, our biggest challenge right now, because the grant we've gotten is for redevelopment, not for acquisition. Our biggest challenge right now is getting to yes with one of those property owners.
And can I ask just to, thank you for that, can I ask just to add to that, so, what were the reasons that you decided not to just put this on the town, let's say, the redevelopment, is there?
So,
So-
I think lack of town interest would be one of them. One of the lucky things in forming in December, we realized that we do need money to acquire a building if we want to deploy this grant. And so we quickly organized to get the signatures to ask for a special appropriation. The town of Braintree had a little bit of ARPA money that they had converted and had available to give the trust an appropriation for acquisition of a building. And in the town meeting around that, and that was successful, that appropriation has been earmarked for us. We have a little bit of ways to go with the select board on how that agreement will come out. But in that discussion at town meeting, it was very clear that the town clerk and the infrastructure of a town the size of Braintree that is not there for supporting a town-owned property. And there's a lot of reasons I think towns
Yeah.
don't want to be landlords or operators of a property. Very good reasons for that.
Yeah. Thank you. Exactly what I was hoping you would get to.
Roundabout way.
Tina.
Yeah, so, Lunenburg adopted their very first municipal plan in February of last year. We had never had one before. Yes, and it was throughout that entire process that we learned all of the needs of the community. We learned about things that weren't happening in the community. We learned about this big, beautiful schoolhouse that wasn't being used in the community, that was owned by the school district. And after the whole planning process, and we got the plan approved locally, we got it approved regionally. A few of us were like, okay, what do we do with all of this? And let's do something. And meanwhile, this fantastic program, Village Trust Initiative, came up, and it was almost like written for our building, our school, and for our community. So two of us, there were only two of us, applied for this, and we were very lucky to get it. And since that time, we've been able to grow our board a little bit, not to the extent that you have, but we're working on it. And so really ours came out of the whole planning process, and the community, the town. The school building is still owned by the Kingdom East School District. The town did not want anything to do with the school. As a matter of fact, we got the select board recently to vote that they do not have any interest in owning the building, and that's how we're gonna be able to work with the school district to acquire the building from the school district. So the town didn't want to pay for it, they didn't want to own it, and it was a perfect place for a community trust organization to step in and fill that hole, really, that was there.
Can you share what the size of your grants were?
Share with us what?
The size of your grants?
It's up to you.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
that's fine. I mean, it's gonna change every year, but
And it depends on the
Yeah.
project.
it depends on the
Yeah.
size of the
Okay, just
project,
curious.
what they're trying to take on, so.
So it's $650,000, $150 of that is the technical assistance and then 400,000 for the redevelopment is the total amount that we could draw if our plans.
Yeah.
When your plan?
When our, yes, thank you for that.
And ours is exactly the same, 150,000 in pre-development funds, and then the 500,000 for and structural.
Yeah, and these were our two highest awards just because of the size and scope of what they were trying to take on. So just to set expectations, it's not all of them are gonna be that high.
I'm sure.
Yeah, just that there.
So the Algiers Village is one of it's kind of the commercial hub of Guilford, but Guilford's really spread out. And in 2004, I was, some board members had highlighted to me, like, the reason we formed this was fear. Because there was a bunch of decrepit buildings in our commercial center, and a number of folks on the town, the select board and town administrator had heard that they were all gonna go up for sale. And they were worried about, since we have no zoning, what was gonna happen to this town center. So they formed together, reached out and actually created community trust, worked with Windsor Housing Trust to see if, hey, we put some low-income multifamily housing in this area, and a number of other community members, the town, and were able to purchase those 5 buildings. At that point, a store was not in the cards. There was a store on that property, and I'll get to that later, but that was not something that they were even considering purchasing as part of that community trust. It was really, how do we develop this area so it matches with our town plan to have community-centered sustainable development? And that was low-income multifamily housing and getting rid of, there was a brownfield there as well.
Can I just clarify, you have no zoning?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, I come across that more than I would, yeah, it's not. Yeah.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, I was on our planning commission for 7 years.
So what do you do on a planning position?
Try. We make a lot of suggestions. We bring in opportunities to look at cooperation with other towns and highlight how other towns have done things.
To their benefit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's,
You're governed by a select.
we are governed by a select board. We just have no zoning, and it's very challenging.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna move on to Megan.
Sure. So I'll just touch briefly on why someone might form a 501 or a nonprofit entity. I think you could go through the town legally. There's no I don't really see a reason why you couldn't. That's not a model we've worked with before, especially if you're looking at how to get donations. I believe you can donate to a government entity, and that would give the donor the same tax benefit. But I think it really does tend to be, as these folks have highlighted, the capacity of the town and then working through that process, which can be sometimes a little more bureaucratic than it is to work through a nonprofit organization, especially when you have a board of folks who are committed to the project, where that might be a little more tricky to do from a town committee. So that often forming that separate entity allows you to act more flexibly and in a more pointed way.
Thank you.
You have to follow open meeting law when you're we have a community fund, and it is a committee of the select board. We're completely independent. We have our own board, but we have to warn everything. We have to post them, and it's just a higher.
Extra
burden.
steps, right?
And that does tend to be more onerous than what's required under the state nonprofit law, which of course you could choose if you wanted to run your nonprofit like open meeting, you could choose to do that, but you don't have to.
I'm
So
gonna-
can you clarify that? So if you're, formed under the state laws for a nonprofit, you do not have to have open meeting, do not comply.
Let's do this last question, and I'm gonna get us back on
Okay.
track. We can ask.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a separate,
Okay.
open meeting is for government, and then there's the Vermont Nonprofit Corporation Act that governs nonprofits.
Thank you.
Great, okay, so and if you have questions, please write them down, so I'm gonna try to save at least a half hour for us to like dig into some of the stuff a little bit more. But just in case we can answer some of them, the whole group, let's move forward with just thinking about your mission as a trust. You're welcome to sort of say what your mission is, but what is the work that you're trying to take on as a community trust organization? I'm happy to start anywhere on this. We can start at the end again, or whoever wants to jump in.
So, we, when we were putting our bylaws and our mission together in October and November, we had a lot of wordsmithing and drafts. And, what is the meaning of this word and how will it be taken in the community? And so basically we are there to support the cultural vitality of the greater Snowsville area. We felt it was important to be broad. if we, obviously can amend as we go along, if we find that anything that we created needs to be amended in our process. But that's where we're starting from, and the project that we're taking on, we want to acquire one of these buildings and predominantly turn it into housing. 4 or 5 units, and have some sort of, community space. There was a general store in Snowsville that closed about 8 years ago or so. And, just 2 months ago, we had our first community meeting with the immediate sort of Snowsville, population it's a gem of a little church in Snowsville. And that was one of the themes that came up in that conversation, is this missing, people really miss the store, the place where you could intersect with folks. But the likely targets for our acquisition are clearly going to be housing forward.
Yeah, and that's for the right now, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that there might be opportunities as we go along to tackle some of these other things that you're.
Yeah, it kind of keeps the excitement
Yeah.
going. We want to be successful in our first project, but we're also, everyone's, gears are clicking away
Yes.
in the village of Snowsville.
Yeah. Tino.
Yeah, so our mission is to champion, and that wordsmithing, we really did the same thing with the wordsmithing, to champion community and economic revitalization in our town. So our town is like many in Vermont. We were an old mill town. The paper mill closed its doors for the very last time in 2007. That's after bouncing for years. It started off as a very successful and a very large employer of people in the town. We had like 300 people employed at one time by the mill in a very small town. So, that shrunk. So economic revitalization was key to our messaging. Let's see, I think I mentioned our project is what used to be the old Gilman Middle School. And it is just owned by Kingdom East School District. The only thing that is in there right now, a portion of it is being occupied by a Head Start program. What used to be in there were the middle school's kids, but like many of the other schools in Vermont as well, our middle school kids are now going to Concord. So they got moved. We still have an elementary school in town, but that's it. That's all we have. So there was a lot of negativity when that school, our school kids had to move out. Then, of course, the building is sitting there. It's got a Head Start. That's great, but the rest of it is unused. And the community lost this space. So we're looking at, it's 14,500 square feet. It's a good size, but it's not huge. We could put some housing units in some portions of it. We believe that keeping Head Start or other childcare would be important to the community, and in some of the things that we've run, they've given that message back to us. They feel childcare is important as well. And other opportunities are arising for what else we could use that space for.
And ours, as I mentioned earlier, it was initially to preserve these buildings for sustainable and economic center of the town. Those buildings got turned into 17 apartments for low-income housing, working with our Wyndham Windsor Housing Trust. And at that point, the Friends of Algiers was like, okay, there is a Vermont store, and we've got our country store in town. It's right in that same area. It's in an old historic building. And at that point, the store owner said, I can either sell the 7-Eleven, but I would love this to become a functioning country store again. So in 2010, the board started saying, okay, we've shifted, the apartments are up and running, that's going, so we're gonna really shift and focus on getting this country store revitalized. And so they did a huge kind of community planning grant for that area. And I think all of them said, oh, all of the signs were pointing toward, don't do this because it's gonna be a huge amount of work and a huge amount of money. And they all said, you know what, we need this for our community, so we're gonna do it. And they did. I mean, I think a lot of it is thanks to Preservation Trust of Vermont and other funders in the community that stepped in and said, we will help you with this funding. Do you want me to talk about the store now?
if you wanna touch on it now, I mean, I'll probably ask you a little bit more in depth on it
Sure.
later, but.
So it
yeah.
took about a year of construction work to get what was a general store that was really falling apart. Into a functioning space for a country store. At that point, I have to hand it, I work with the most amazing board members, our board is about 15. And they drove around the state purchasing used equipment, food service equipment. So be able to set up a store. They did not have someone to run the store yet, but they were like, we will build it and then we will find someone to run the store. And they did. Store owners stepped in 2013, that store opened and became a viable country store and a cafe.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice work. So Megan. Does this align in terms of what you normally see with this type of stuff? And then how do you make things like running a country store, opening housing, bringing back, spaces in a school, creating community? How is that seen as charitable?
Yeah, definitely. So, that's a lot of what we do when we're working on these applications for tax exempt status is say, how do we translate these amazing plans and how we're gonna revitalize the community into activities that the IRS is going to see as charitable? Because there's I think we have a sort of a broad sense of what it means to be charitable, but it's actually a very, a narrower definition. And so what we try to do is sort of fit it into what are the recognized categories, especially recognizing too that like right now the IRS is very understaffed and being cut, and it's a little unpredictable the way that political pressures are trickling down, and we want to give everyone the best chance of getting exempt status. So what the models that community trust normally fit into, first would be historic preservation. And preserving historic buildings. So it's always very helpful if the buildings have been listed as a national or a state historic location. And that helps to show that, they've been state recognized as historic and what you're doing is coming. And that's a pretty well recognized charitable purpose. Of course, it then needs to be open to the public in some form, and there's some nuances there, but that's always helpful. Another area that we've seen community trust operate charitably is a phrase that doesn't sound great, but it's called combating community deterioration and lessening neighborhood tensions. And so that's something that we see often in Vermont is you have these older buildings that may have fallen into disrepair. And so coming in and restoring that building and showing that what you're trying to do is redevelop the community. It doesn't have to be falling down. It doesn't have to be actually deteriorated. You can sort of proactively prevent community deterioration as well. But that's another avenue that groups have worked at. So those are typically sort of the front end activities. But then we also want to think about what is the organization actually doing in running the store, and is that activity itself charitable? And so in running a store and housing are actually two areas where we have a little bit of a yellow flag, because for a store, I mean, that's a for-profit enterprise normally. What we've seen in Vermont is that because they're in small rural communities, sometimes you can't actually attract an operator to come in who says, yes, this is where I'm gonna make money. And without a nonprofit coming to step in, you might lose that business or not have that area. So we can sort of tie that into either the historic preservation or the economic revitalization, where running the store is actually sort of serving that purpose. But it's something to think through that, the IRS will be skeptical if this ends up being a enterprise that ends up making a lot of money. And so you want to make sure you're, thinking through that and how you have the relationships with the operator, setting that up in a way where the concern is something called private benefit. You want your organization to be running for the benefit of the public, not to benefit individual people. And you can have a little bit of private benefit, but if it's too much, it'll threaten your tax exempt status. So that's something to look out for in running a store. The other one is housing. There's really specific guidelines around running when providing housing is charitable, if you're doing it for low income individuals. And so there's very specific guidelines about how, what the median income has to be and what your rents are. And so that's one model to operate within. But then there's also the sort of a little bit squishier is we're going to combat community deterioration by developing housing. It's can be a little bit riskier to go that way because you don't have those strict guidelines where you say we're giving housing to low income individuals and therefore we are charitable, but that's also a model that we've seen working. So really, throughout this process, what you're trying to make sure is that the building, you're gonna have something in it that's gonna be financially sustainable so that it can, your nonprofit can operate. You're still probably gonna look at donations and grants, but it's nice to have something running in there that brings in some sort of revenue, but how do you do it so that it doesn't cross the line into what's called unrelated business in taxable income or go so far as to threaten your tax exempt status? Those are all considerations to think about.
And not to scare you away, so I'm still learning too, you just taught me something, so.
Yeah, I think groups do
but,
this successfully all the time, so there are, it's not red flags, just
Yeah.
things to look out
Things
for.
to think about, and if something feels overwhelming, there are professionals who are here to help, and then there are groups who are here to help you get grants to work with those professionals, so. So you've identified some areas of need, you talked about your mission, you talked about what you have to be looking at in terms of forming it. As a community trust organization, you need a board. And you are all sort of in various stages. We have Stephanie Winstoneville, who has pretty much a fully formed board. Tina, you guys have an awesome group, but you're still looking to grow.
We have 4 people right now.
You're like, second generation. So yeah, if we could just sort of go down and talk about, how did you build up your board? And was there anything while you were working through your bylaws that really wanted to concentrate on? Then I'm probably gonna end with you again, just to sum it all up.
As I mentioned before, the 2 neighbors that were successful in securing the grant, the VTI grant, reached out. My sister lives nearby as well to myself, my sister, and we have a few new young folks that have, come to the area. Snowsville is actually right in the corner of Brookfield, and the village of West Brookfield is just up the street. And so a few folks that live there are interested because they pass through Snowsville on a daily commute. And so it was a matter of reaching out, pulling people together, in one location for a couple weekends, so, a couple, 2 hours, a couple weeks in a row, and figuring out who was interested. We ended up with, my background is finance, so I'm the treasurer. We have a handful of fellows that are builder and history types. We have a couple of lawyers that
Entrepreneurs.
2 young entrepreneurs that have, started new businesses in Randolph. One fellow's an environmental engineer. We had a few people that said, no, I can't take on anything else right now.
Someone who does historic preservation. which-
Yeah. He's our president.
Yeah, I think you guys have done a really fantastic job of sort of getting a group together that has a lot of knowledge, that it feels like people can plug in.
Yeah,
Where they're most
that's-
helpful and
Yeah. That's what's been sort of amazing about this is, me realizing that, we had a very time limited ability to potentially get an appropriation from the town and, enlisting people to jump into that for when we needed to. And Jackson enlisting people, and he and another group of folks from the trust are seeking the village designation.
Right.
And that process is underway. We are not very far along in fundraising.
But yeah, and I think about, with these volunteer organizations, there's a lot of burnout, we're tired, even though we're excited and we love what we're doing. It's a lot to potentially work a full day or whatever it is, and then at night come and try to work on this stuff that you're passionate about. And I think something I appreciate with your group is it really does feel like you do that plug and play well. And I don't know if that will totally prevent burnout. I think I made you guys pretty tired after the community event. But, to me, it seems like there's potential for people to be able to pull back once in a while, but it's
And other
not their
people
area of
step in.
expertise. Yeah, and step in. So, Tina, speaking of burnout, please don't.
So we have a board of 4 right now. So we started with 2, so we've doubled it. But we have so many activities going on in Lunenburg right now. There's been this like rebirth of energy happening in the town after a long period of really nothing happening. So, we had VCRD come out and do the community visit program. That prompted two really strong task forces, and those task forces are going full throttle, right? So we're trying to build our organization. We've got these task forces, we've got the historical society, you know, you've got all of these groups. It is a lot of groups trying to use a lot, you know, limited set of resources. So, we're looking, you know, we put feelers out to see who, would like to join it. And we're garnering a lot of enthusiasm for the organization and for the board. But we want to make sure that also we're all on the same page, right? We have a vision for the building, we have a vision for the trust. So the trust is more than the building. We started out with, we're going for VTI because we want to renovate the Gilman Middle School. And now we're like, oh, well, the trust, you know, to do this art programs. And I said, oh yeah, and by the way, we're doing this little thing called the Gilman Middle School. And too. So our board of four, we have two old retired tech people. We have a ex the small business owner and a retired physician. I'm on the planning committee. One of the other board members, the president, is on the planning committee. And is now the town clerk and the town treasurer. And let's see, and I'm the secretary of the board.
And, you know, I think it is smart to think through and make sure that the people you're working with, you guys are all committed toward the same end goal instead of just rushing to fill seats. But it's smarter to kind of, you know, go slow and form your group and really thought.
So it is keeping us on
So-
track.
Thayer, you want to talk a little bit about?
So our board is 15 people. And when they first began, most of those folks I'd say were in their 50s. So now they're in their 70s. And I'd say about 5 to 6 years ago, they said, oh, okay, this is a lot of work. And they actually did a really concerted effort to bring in a second generation of board members, which I am of that generation. Another thing they decided to do, and a lot of them stayed on, people are they're just kind of slowly retiring off, but they created a nominating committee as one of our key committees of our board. And that nominating committee is always scanning who's coming into town, who's working on projects, oh, who might be interested to focus on this. And they do a great job of doing a lot of outreach to try and bring in some new board members. So we'll actually welcome 2 new board members this year, and no one has to leave. It's not capped at 15. And so it really is a nice opportunity. The board meets 4 times a year. And then if people want to be more engaged, there's a lot of different, you know, fundraising committee, there's an operations committee, there's a vision committee. And then to ensure that the land around them, we're not just focusing on a single house, there's a trails and environment committee as well.
And then sort of to cap it off again, thank you always for doing this. Do you want to maybe talk, a little bit about bylaws and forming all of that?
Sure. So much of the work, you know, comes from who's on the board in doing, in making sure that the organization is successful in the long term. But there are some structural things that you can do in your bylaws to help set up your organization for success in that transition. And I think one of the key things to do is, maintaining as much flexibility as possible so that you're not frequently amending your bylaws, because that can be a little bit of a rigmarole and a process. And you want to, you know, build in a board. You only need 3 people under Vermont law, but that's often not enough. So we tend to, you know, give people the flexibility to the board to say, we're not going to go under 3, but we can have the board set the size, and then that helps them have the flexibility to create the size that works for them at the time that it works for them. The other big thing is creating staggered terms. I think that's a really important way to build in having people phase in and out in a way where you can maintain institutional knowledge and have new people come in and learn from the folks who are already there, and sort of have a more frequent turnover of smaller amounts of people to keep that momentum going. It can be a little tricky to set up, and the way that we normally do it is that you have to have some people that start with shorter terms and some people that start with longer terms. And often you can actually just You know, you can legally do successive terms, as many as you want. If you have someone that's interested and is willing to continue to serve, great to keep that person on. But to have them serve, you know, terms that are staggered. Some people are 2 years, some people are 3 years, until everyone has a set term of, you know, 1, 2, or 3 years. That way, you're replacing people on a more frequent on a basis, so you don't have everybody moving at once.
Yep. And so that's, you know, you have your people, right? You have your bylaws, you have your mission, all of that. Is there anything else that people should be thinking about, as they move toward the formation of 501c3? What is that?
Yeah, I think when you're thinking about funding and how you're gonna get that funding and that gap period between when you form and when you get recognized as a tax exempt organization. We've seen a huge amount of variety in the timing there. We've seen it take 3 days, and we've also seen it take closer to a year. Again, the IRS feels a little unpredictable right now. I'd say most of them are between the 6 to 8 months. So that creates a period of time when you might be getting grants or want to apply for grants or want people to give donations. And so finding a fiscal sponsor organization to work with, who is an established 501c3 that's willing to sort of sponsor your organization and be the one to actually receive those donations and then and oversee them and distribute them to you can be really critical for that gap period and help organizations through that bridge. And that normally you would have a written agreement between your organization and the fiscal sponsor that lays out that relationship.
Thank you, Tina. Do you wanna, when we originally talked, you had a great comment about.
Yeah,
so.
the only thing about fiscal sponsorship is, they might not be able to go for some grants with just that. You have to have a 501c3. Or the fiscal sponsor is not willing to go in on one of these larger grants with you. So you really, you know, lessons learned. Go after your 501c3 as soon as possible. As soon as you've got your board established, you should be ready to fill out that paperwork the very next day. We haven't been hot and waited and, you know, finally had a lot of help. And we're very lucky in getting it moved forward quickly, but we could have been in a lot of trouble if we had not. So I would just say move forward as quickly as possible with that.
Yeah, and things to think about, I mean, you only need 3 people, right? So if you build that flexibility in to potentially expand to 15, but you just need 3 to start, that doesn't mean you have to have everything perfect before you apply. You have to have that groundwork laid. And I think also just to add to that, just be very clear with your fiscal sponsor about the types of grants that you want to go for, and making sure that as you plan out, you know, your financial path forward, you are keeping this in mind. It's like, oh, well, if we want to apply to this big federal grant, we actually have to get 501c3 for this specific one. So we're going to want to apply to that next year. So we should probably look for some other foundation grants or something ahead of time. So just keeping this all in mind as you move forward. You started to touch on this, and there's so many ways to operate as a community trust organization. And I just want to, because you guys have been around for 20 years, which is like the main thing. Good job. Can you tell us some of the stuff that you do as board members?
Yeah, so I think we're in a really interesting place. We found someone to take over the store and run it in 2013. They ran it until COVID, and COVID was obviously really hard. And wanted to retire, and then we found a new store operator who had actually worked in our school district, and it was her dream to run store. She took over about 3 years ago, and it's been outstanding. She's wonderful. The store now employs 26 people, not full time. Yeah. Right? Because they do catering. But you know, we were laughing at a board meeting last week. We're almost victims of our own success because our parking lot is now too small. And all of those wonderful pieces of food service equipment that we bought that were used are all failing. And they are doing a booming business. That place is packed. The community loves it. It's got great catering. But as a nonprofit, we actually our balance is going down. because we own a historic building and historic buildings take so much work and maintenance. And we are realizing we almost have to look at, okay, Guilford Store 2.0 of now we need to actually do grant fundraising to get ourselves back to a place where we can fix these kind of deferred maintenance issues with the building. And, potentially look at, we've always had a, lower rent for that store operators because it was of the community. Do we change that operation so that we actually, as a nonprofit, are financially viable and have a future? So that's a lot of the discussions that are going on right now.
Yeah.
We also have 2 apartments upstairs that now have folks, and we have a barber shop in that whole building, so it's been really great, and
Take a trip down there.
different kinds of, it's just different kinds of challenges.
Yeah, and just being ready to sort of adapt it.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of our board members said, oh, we kind of thought once we got the store up and running, and we got really a good person in there that, okay, we'd be done and we'd be in good shape, and now that we're all realizing, oh no, this doesn't really.
Just changes,
It
new
just changes,
challenges,
yeah.
new puzzles to solve.
Yeah.
Great, so the last thing I want us to just touch on briefly, just because it's close to my heart, is community engagement. And if a few of you would be willing to talk about the importance of engaging your community in this work and having their support. I'm gonna start with you this time, Tina.
Yeah, so we had a lot of, I mentioned before, we had some negativity in town, the feelings of losing the school. And no belief that really an organization was gonna be able to come in and really take over a school, make it community oriented and everything. So we've kind of been fighting that a little bit, but, we're making some serious inroads into that. I really do have to keep saying, thanks to Kaziah and VCRD and the folks, they really guided us because we're like, oh, this is a great project. Why doesn't everybody know and support us, right? But there's ways you have to do that. Planning person, right? I don't know how to get support necessarily and all these, so they help us, but, yeah, we were able to, we're really able to finally get people coming and very eager. They're accepting the fact that this is really going to happen. They're giving us their ideas for the building. So there is really, great support. So you do have to keep getting out there. You have to be open and honest with everybody. You have to continually ask them for what they want. You have to listen to them while they're complaining about all the things why they are angry, right? And they have valid reasons for being angry. And you have to listen to all these and then try to help them get past and see a future for that.
Stephanie, you're gonna ask them.
Yeah, and the listening is so important. As I mentioned, housing, lots of people recognize the need for housing, but the recent experience, I think, in town, what does it mean to have affordable housing? People automatically think, transient and, are you gonna, it's just gonna decay again if you're having affordable housing? So being able to be just, we're listening to those, not trying to, engage in an argument, but, we're trying to build up the town and, understanding that we don't even have a building yet, we're a project plan really yet, but we're listening. And, I think it's great that you guys have trails, because they're at our community meeting, trails and the ability to, have recreation was a big part of that, not even tied to a building, and it was great to hear that, even though I don't know when we will get to it.
But it's something that's now on your horizon, and I
Yeah.
think that's such an important part of this listening, right? 'Cause maybe we live in really small communities and you might recognize everyone's faces, but you don't know everything that everyone is thinking, and so you know what you want. But having these discussions, it kind of opens your mind to, oh, we need to think about trails. We never thought about trails. We've been really focused on housing in a community space. So it kind of broadens that horizon and like I said, allows you to create your plan for moving forward more accurately to represent the whole community. So do you have either of you want to speak to this before we open for questions?
I just underscore the listening aspect, especially low income housing. I think that was something that was a really big hot button issue, and now that low-income housing is in, and most of the people that live there are people that are from the community, and I think that has gone a long way, showing that these are people that in our community that were just not able to afford their current housing situation, and now we are providing them with community and more sustainable housing, has really garnered a lot of goodwill.
You're all set on that? Okay, all right. Well, we've made it through. Thank you for being patient and holding questions. Alyssa, I'm gonna have you be the representative for our online attendees. But does anyone want to kick off with a question for these brilliant people?
So, I mean, this sounds like a fabulous first shot for funding, grant funding. What other resources have you accessed for other grants for this type of project? And I know you partnered with Wyndham and Windsor Housing Trust. That's a big piece of the housing expense too.
Preservation Trust of Vermont has been our #1 champion. We had to replace our roof, and that was huge. I'd say another big one in bringing that community aspect is when we were first getting up and running, community members gave us no interest loans. And that was a huge thing that we were able to then, kind of use that as collateral, and matching funds for other grants that we would not have been unable to get otherwise, and that was been really helpful.
We have a community trust that's been in place now for about 5 years, and I was also involved in a project to build an affordable house, and they lent us $50,000 at a very reasonable rate, which got us to the finish line. So that's something to keep in mind if you start one, to be open to ideas of how else you can help your community.
All right, thanks.
With the country store, is there any thought of turning it over to an entity that would run it for profit? So it looks like it's pretty viable.
Yeah, that's a great question. I should clarify. So we own the space, obviously, and we are in a sense the landlords for a for-profit business that operates out of there. We provide that person a reduced rate, because they probably would not be able to function, paying full rent in that area because of the rural nature of it. The highlights that I've been talking about in terms of equipment replacement and all those things are having us not necessarily renegotiate that, but kind of do a deeper dive with that store owner of, okay, you're operating a really successful business, and as your landlords, as the nonprofits, we're actually really struggling. So is there a way we can do a different model of not necessarily profit sharing, but just change the rent structure?
Can I just ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
This is probably making it more, but does the IRS ever come back and look at an example like that in a different light after?
Yeah, so I feel like the biggest when you have the most contact with the IRS is when you do the 1023 application. Hypothetically, there is enforcement. We don't in practice see a ton of it. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And some groups do get audited, do get scrutinized. Some lose tax exempt status, but the 990, that annual form is really, that's where you report your numbers to the IRS. I think they look at like 1 to 2% of those every year, but if someone were to file a complaint or they just decide to randomly audit, that's where they're looking at those numbers. Yeah.
Thank you. I just was curious.
Just generally the question about, as a nonprofit organization, you can bring in income, and the question is whether it's related to your mission. And so that's really making why is running a store or renting to an operator related to economic revitalization? And when you make that case to them, that as long as those numbers still shake out, and I'm not an accountant, so I don't know how that actually works with, how much is too much, and those are sort of squishy lines, but that's the idea, is that what you're doing is you're bringing in income that's related to your mission, and you're not taking those profits yourself personally as a board member. That's okay.
Right, we're gonna go to the back here because you had your hand up, and then we'll do one from the virtual audience after that.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. This is incredible information. We are, both Beth and I are select board members, and so we appointed here the housing task force because it is a huge issue in our town, as it is across Vermont and across the country. So incredible 7 members, a lot of 17 people showed up to be interviewed, so qualified. They just submitted their report to us, and so incredibly gratifying. They all said, we're all signing on again for another River 2.0. So that's gonna be fundraising. They talked about a community trust. Obviously, Stowe is a well-heeled community. I fundraised for arts organizations quite a lot, across the state, Arts Council and in Stowe. My question is, what is your experience cultivating donors? Like, people who have so much money, it's like, it would be nothing for you to give us $250,000. This is your community base, you say, love us. Because that's kind of where my thinking goes. Have you had experiences like that?
Start.
We have not.
Very early.
No, we are very much at the beginning of we're paddling like crazy on many different fronts. But fundraising is the next element. Aside from that town appropriation, we know that we have to create our fundraising committee and design our fundraising plan. You know, we know that there are some likely suspects that the more gifted prospect, the more gifted folks on the board in that arena will probably approach, but we'll be actually leaning probably on both PBT and VCRD in guidance as we embark on that.
You know, so just to watch your progress.
Yeah.
That's great. Thank
Do
you.
either of you want to add? I might text.
I mean, I'd say we're not a well-built town, so we have an annual appeal that goes out.
Great, that's good too, thank you.
Yeah, and we send it to about 200 of our community members, and I'd say on the whole, we raise about 20,000 a year just in community donations to our nonprofit.
Well,
And
that's important too, because when you have that pyramid of fundraising.
Yes.
Your nonprofit fundraising, and those are, you know, top, bottom, these top ones you take out for dinner.
Yeah.
That's the place in town. And you have community events for, and you get in touch with them and you meet with them. So, you know, my person, so, but it's obviously typical appeal. That's what you're talking about. Thank you.
Yeah, and there's a lot. Oh, do you want
No, I
to?
just wanted to add that Jill and I both serve on the Stowe Select Board, and I think the immediate knee jerk for a lot of people is, so, I mean, we're used to that, like, we don't need to feel sorry for you, you have so much money and all of that, yet reality is our town is almost down. Because you're losing every year less and less, old to say. Product of your own success, I would say COVID destroyed us in so many ways. And so people talk about the community support, about putting your money where your mouth is, and as I guess I'm saying at this point, like, what are we all willing to sacrifice to survive? And that sort of shows out as far as we're about to probably lose our high school. And other than people don't see us that way, and yet we are in that kind of trouble.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the reason
Well, the
we
housing.
need to increase locals living there and making it accessible for housing is even more critical for us than it's ever been. And there's limited places to do it.
Well, and short-term rentals are off the chart, so let's face it.
If I could interrupt this
Yeah.
for a sec, and I think what you're saying is really important, because when you're thinking about fundraising, having your story, having your mission, having your talking points, you know, what is your elevator
Yeah.
pitch of what it is that you're trying to do and
Absolutely.
why? Because you do need to get beyond that first layer, right? That book cover, I think we were talking about the
Right, right.
opening session, to get into what's really in those pages, because you want to be transparent with these donors. You want their ideas, you want their opinions, you want them to understand where you're coming from. Well, yes, you want their money eventually, but you also want them to be giving to an organization that they want to be giving to. So having that story is really important. Having a strategy is really important. So you're not just going out, putting out, you know, the thermometer and saying, everyone give us a whole bunch of money, please, you know. Cause I mean, you might get some that way, but you're thinking about, you know, your groups coming together and thinking, you know, who has donated to different places in the past, and who knows that person, and who has this connection, and who has a summer house here or a hunting cabin, and you're thinking, how could these people relate to our story? So you're thinking about this really on a human scale before you're thinking about it just on the money scale, and coming up with that strategy, and then going to your community and doing that appeal is really your last piece of that puzzle, right? Because they're that level where you're not asking everyone to give $5,000-$10,000. You're asking, hey, if you could pinch in $20, fantastic, and now you're a part of this, you're a stakeholder. So there's a lot of resources out there. I know Christine Graham has some great books that provide some basic guidance on how to attack some of this stuff. And the biggest thing that I would say is just that don't be afraid. It's really scary to ask people for money the first time, but then you realize that they can say no. No, it's not a big deal.
And they can say
just
yes.
no, but they
in a
could
good way.
say yes, and so you're not
Asking for money is, people think it's difficult because you take it personally.
Yeah.
It's not personal.
It's not.
When you own the story, when you develop the story and you've read it, it's so much easier to go out there because our story isn't about. It's about saving our community. Like everybody's story here is about community. That's why we want to form a trust. Yeah, you know,
It's
that's,
about a 75-year-old woman who is semi-retired trying to stay in the town.
Yeah.
I've been there 35 years and I'm not the only person in this state who feels that way. Can I continue to live there?
I'm gonna see, are there any online attendees who have any questions?
Well, one, I'll say there's 15 people, so thank you to our panelists. I know that took a little moment to get this set up. I jogged back from Judd, so just want to again thank everyone for their patience and understanding, and thanks to the 15 folks online. We did have Sarah Keating from H Strong Vermont who asked about it looks like a shared living situation as a potential housing thing. I think it might be a little more detailed, but maybe Megan, I don't know if you could follow up around middle and upper income groups and older adults living together. And Sarah, if you want to come up mute and say this, because I'm not summarizing it well, please feel free, but it seemed pretty technical.
I was just wondering, because
Yeah, so is the question about, like, can you do that type of housing?
Yeah, and I think, go ahead, Sarah, I saw you trying.
can you hear?
Oh, it's nice. So close. Yes.
Are you able to hear me? Okay. So I was listening in a little while ago about the conversations about what to do with the other spaces. We obviously have a housing crisis in Vermont. At the same time we have a housing crisis, we know that our population, or at least at this point, statistics indicate that our population is also in decline. So we have a housing crisis right now, but 15 years from now, the housing crisis could be the opposite, where we have too much housing, right? And then that will reduce the value of people's properties. So one of the questions is, how do we create housing that maybe doesn't detract farther down the road, but helps people now? And there is a organization in Chinatown in San Francisco, started in the 70s. It was what PACE was originally modeled off of. It's called Unlock. And the woman who, spearheaded it, Marie-Louise Ansock, basically the idea was she bought a hotel, she put all the services in the bottom of the hotel, and rented out the rooms from the old hotel were turned into studio apartments, and it was geared towards Chinese Americans who were being put in nursing homes and didn't have access to their food, their culture, their language, and so it provided them a place to retire and live and have services. And I'm just wondering if this space, and I'm not saying necessarily for any particular culture, but is this a space where mixed income, multi-generational housing could support the businesses that are also in the space?
Does that seem like something that could be classified as a charitable purpose?
Yeah, I think it's something that people think about a lot because housing of all types is needed everywhere and it feels like such a community need. I feel like the biggest takeaway that I have is just providing housing itself is not charitable, even though it feels like it should be in this day and age. You've got to have some other hook with it. So if maybe that's how you sustain historic preservation. Maybe that's how you're combating your community deterioration, is you've got a falling down building and it's gonna become housing. Like I said, the guidelines on how that looks is, it's not quite as clear if you do low income housing, but if you are able to successfully make the case, then you are more flexible with it and you could provide it, you could choose to make it affordable. If that's uppercase A affordable housing or lowercase a affordable housing, and that gives you some more flexibility down the line, but you just need to be thinking about like, what's that initial hook that makes this charitable?
And could I add, I mean, every community, we probably have similar issues, but we have different issues too. So the housing question has to be adapted to what's going on in your community. And it will change. So, you know, what they developed back then was perfect for that time, what was going on in their community. You have to understand the housing problem in your community. Don't assume it's what everybody else has. And you really have to dig in to understand it too.
Sorry, this question's for Tina specifically. I'm up in Belvedere, and we also have an old K-6 building that we're looking to use. And you mentioned that you have a Head Start program there.
Yes.
Have you at all during your process with the Vermont Trust, have you guys had a timeline for maybe using some of that space sooner than funding was available, and partially utilizing it for Start and expanding that? You guys thought in that time
Using
limit?
part of the school
Yeah.
early on while we're doing other parts of it.
That's right. It's only building
Yes.
it out. Are you guys incrementally doing, is that how you're
Yes.
approaching it?
So, you know, the school has, like I said, it has Head Start in one part of it, that's operating and they are paying, a rent. So they are a good person to have in there because that helps bring money back in, right? And this large gymnasium, which has the problems that every 1950 gymnasium has, which is PCBs, which we plan on solving. And then there's the other part of the building that we think could turn into housing, if not some kind of businesses, but that is a much more complicated problem to solve. So that one is going to take longer, and we recognize that. We'd love to have it all open and all running and everything happening at the same time, but we understand that that is not going to be the case. We also understand that the community is going to get the biggest bang for their buck by opening and giving them back the gymnasium. So if there's anything we could do about getting that back in first, because that will bring back what they feel they lost the most. Their festivals in the gymnasium and their town meeting running in the gymnasium and everything, right? So yes, we are absolutely thinking about phases. Also building our funding stack to match those phases. Complicated series of 4,000 spreadsheets to figure this all out and timelines and everything, but yeah, I think that the right way to do it is timeline phasing and trying to fit everything in where it buttonholes best.
Can I just note, especially for online, really limiting the side conversation helps. I'm worried about the owl picking it up and being able to hear. So just so that the question asker and the panelists could talk would be great.
Thank you so much. Can I do one more virtual? Are there any other virtual questions?
I think that's all I have.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
So I have a question. I'm trying to visualize the existing select board, which does everything in the fact that we don't have a community trust at this point. And I'm trying to visualize how you transition from, you know, existing roles and expectations and moving towards community trust. Is this easy transition or is it complicated? Or I'm trying to visualize how you would do that.
So going from, just to be more specific, like the group who might be working on something at a select board level to expanding into trust, is that?
I wasn't thinking of the select board as
Yeah.
initiating the community trust. That would be coming from a different initiative, I think.
Okay,
But existing jobs in terms of municipally owned buildings, you know, and responsibility for, you know, heat, electricity, maintenance. And then it seems to me that when you have community trust, it takes on some of those, most of those roles possibly. Maybe
Yeah.
making their job easier, I don't know, but.
yeah, and we have a few groups right now who have a municipally owned building and they're creating long-term leases to operate and maintain the building. And so that is probably gonna look different for every group, in terms of what it is that they take on, because there's a group that, you know, let's say it's the food pantry, is still gonna be operating out of a portion of that building. And so we need to look at that and say, well, what portion of the electricity bill are we gonna be paying versus the food pantry who has the refrigerator and they're in there, you know, 3 days a week or something. And so it's probably gonna be pretty individualized as we start to break this down. It might be very clear cut. They might be just renting the whole building and they're in charge of all the bills, all the maintenance, everything. But it might be a little bit more parsed. Is that answer sort of?
I think so, yeah, so that the trust would be managing those day-to-day details maybe.
Yes. Yep, yeah, so most of them will be paying some sort of in the same way that the general store owner is paying a rent monthly to the community trust. The community trust will then be paying whatever it is they decide, could be $1 a month if you have a very generous select board. it will probably be something that is gonna recuperate any losses, or it, again, very individualized, but the community trust would likely be giving something back to the select board for that lease agreement.
Oh, thank you.
Other questions? Go to you.
I have a lot of questions, so.
It's okay.
So I have served on the select board for 25 years. I live in a really little town. We own a lot of buildings and our select board has one person whose job it is to sort of maintain it, but we have no tenants. And I also serve on the board of the Rutland, Cornerstone Housing Partners is the equivalent of Windsor in Bennington and Rutland County. So we have 800 apartments and I sit on that board, and being a landlord is a horrible job. And just thinking of volunteers being a landlord and, you know, who's gonna be the treasurer and who's gonna do the 990 and who's gonna do the taxes and who's gonna get the phone call when the roof is leaking or the basement's flooding or the heat has failed or the neighbor has a gun and you have to call the police or they're drug dealers or
Yeah.
all those things that happen as landlord. That just feels to me like, I like your model, like let's partner with a third party who can help us with the housing.
Yeah.
Because it's a lot.
Yeah.
And
Yes,
as the
I
person who did most of the work in my town on these buildings, as a volunteer, it was a lot and we had no tenants.
Yeah.
You know, I'm just dealing with the roof or like, oh, the Smiths rented the building and what, you know, like just all that little community stuff. Just hearing your 20-year experience makes me really nervous for this business model. And I understand that like Gen 1 is really excited and you're gonna make it work and you're getting so much support and that's awesome. But the affordable housing partners are spending between $400,000 and $500,000 per unit to create housing, either in existing or in new construction. And it just, it's a lot. I mean,
It is,
I'm-
yeah.
I'm blown away by your enthusiasm.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that is something that we do talk about with organizations who are looking toward housing, is finding that partnership. And not necessarily, and we're not saying don't manage them, but understanding what resources are there, if they're gonna have just one apartment above the general store or something, they decide, okay, we really wanna take this on. But we tend to agree that if you are having multiple apartments, it is a good idea to find a partner. I'm gonna let you said you have a comment or.
I was just gonna say, we have 2 apartments above the general store, and 2 weekends ago, I was painting those apartments because we were turning them over and we've just decided to get a legitimate property manager,
Yeah.
cause it's too much work.
Yeah.
It is the 2 AM phone calls with the sprinklers are going off and board member, deal with this, you're just like, oh, what to do with it, yeah. So we are hiring.
So we're thinking, we have space for 4 studio apartments in the school, and we're actually thinking of using one of those for the building manager. They would get the apartment for free rent, right? And they would be responsible for managing the building. Now, whether that's gonna fall out at the end of that, that's not, you don't know. It's an idea, so we'll see what happens with that, but that's one idea. And also, you can work with the local housing nonprofits in the area, and they will manage your building for you too. So there are other options.
There are a lot of paths forward, and I think just asking, because, you know, I think probably almost every model has been tried at some point, and for better and for worse, so kind of figuring out what is gonna work for you all, and basing that on people's experiences, knowledge, and areas.
And making the numbers pencil out.
Yeah, of course.
Yes.
We only have 3 minutes left. You had a question. Do you still wanna?
Yeah, it can be
Okay.
quick. So I established a nonprofit last year. We got our 501(c)(3) last summer. And it's business support, economic development. Could you have a community trust within an existing, or would you suggest this probably for you to do a second nonprofit and kind of have an umbrella over them?
I think it depends on, you know, what the current nonprofit organization is and what the capacity is, and whether it sort of makes sense to have it as a new project. And I think that would sort of depend on, like, you'd want to think through, you know, do we have the capacity to do this? What sort of liabilities might come with it? Does it make sense to have it be a separate entity? And you might think of, you know, different structures, like, for example, like a parent subsidiary related nonprofits, so that maybe you have some overlapping board members, but they're ultimately two separate organizations. So there's different ways to go about it.
Okay, thanks.
All right, well, first, thank you so much. A lot of information, so please feel free to reach out again. My name is Kaziah at VCRD, Nicole Bratton is my counterpart, Preservation Trust, and as well, a lot of expertise. So reach out. There's resources that can help with all of this. So don't be scared. Great. We-